like Europe has gotten too expensive and crowded to make it worth your while to go over there? Well, think again. Today, our guest is going to teach us about an area in Europe that not only is the landscape stunning, the price is right, the people are wonderful, the weather is gorgeous, particularly in the winter, so it's a great winter escape, and you'll feel like you're in Europe like it was 50 years ago before the throngs of tourists overwhelmed it. Welcome to the Active Travel Adventures Podcast. I'm your host, Kit Parks, and today in episode 38, we're going to do the Rota Vicente, or the Fisherman's Walk, and some surrounding trails on the coastal cliffs of Portugal. We're going to go to an area that is not touristy at all, so you'll feel like you're seeing Portugal as it was decades ago, all at a price that you can afford. And like all of our shows, on the show itself, you'll get a general overview and a flavor and a taste of what this adventure is like. And then if you go to the website, activetraveladventures.com/Portugal or /38 for this particular episode, you'll get lots of photos, often some videos, more of the details and an overview of the itinerary itself. And if you decide, hey, this is something I want to do, click on the free download and you'll get the travel planner absolutely free. That will include all the details that you need, plus active links so that you can plan this adventure yourself. So let's get started. Can you start by introducing yourself and perhaps telling us your age?
My name is Juliana Barnaby and I am 32 years old.
Perfect. And how did you get into adventure travel?
So, it's a slightly convoluted story, which started with me working as a travel writer after university, leaving traveling and the travel industry and working as a lawyer for 5 years in the city before starting the blog when I left the law, and then going to create a travel blog, which I've been working on for the past 2 years. So that's really how I got into adventure travel and how it's developed.
Were you always very physical, that you like to hike and bike and all that kind of stuff? Or is that something new to you once you started traveling?
I'd say I've always enjoyed hiking, and I think there are things that have definitely come along with traveling. So, I was PADI qualified when I got my PADI qualification for diving while I was traveling. And some of the more serious hikes that I've done and long distance hikes that I've done, I only started to really do once I'd started traveling. But I'd always been pretty interested, and I'd always kind of done it to a reasonable level.
And today we're going to be talking about hiking in Portugal. Can you kind of give us a brief overview?
Yeah, so one of the hikes that I've done is the Rota Vincentina, which is actually a series of trails, two main trails in the southwest of Portugal, mainly in the Alentejo region. So one of them, the coastal trail, is called the Fisherman's Trail, and the other one, which is more inland, is called the Historical Way. So I've actually hiked large parts of both of those trails, and they're really beautiful. They're I think the trails were only formally created, or the Fisherman's Trail was only formally created around 2012. So they're relatively new, and the Historical Way was kind of created after that as well. And then there's a series of circular routes that go on different parts of those trails too. So actually, it's a really nice way to see. So the Fisherman's Trail goes all along the coast of the Alentejo coastline, and it's beautiful, and it's a really great way to be able to see the rugged landscapes and to really see, kind of the rough Atlantic coastline in an area that hasn't been hugely developed, that doesn't have loads and loads of, large hotels or lots of development along its way. So it's actually a really nice way to go and see a different part of Portugal and a beautiful part of the European coastline.
Is this something, because it's not so developed, that you need to backpack, or is there a village basically a walking distance each day, or how do you do that? How do you figure it out, the logistics?
So actually the logistics, the Rota Vincentina team, there's a kind of community team that run the trails and look after the trails, and also they have masterminded the ways that you can do these hikes. And so it's actually quite cool, because even though it's quite rural and a lot of the times, in places that aren't hugely developed in terms of lots and lots of accommodation, the ways that the days are broken up tends to mean that you start or finish somewhere where you can stay in a B&B or a local kind of bed and breakfast or hotel, or, somewhere. You don't have to camp to do this trail.
Okay. Do you need to pack your day's water, or is there plenty of water along the way?
Oh, you do need to pack your day's water. So there are places where you can refill along the way, but they're sometimes few and far between. And also, it's quite warm, kind of temperature wise, unless you're hiking in the winter months. So it's definitely one where I would recommend packing your own water and a lot of it.
And what months would you say are the best months to do this? I assume summer might be too hot.
Yeah, summer is actually too hot. So I think they recommend from late September at the earliest until April, May. Between I think May and September, it's really very hot. Kind of when I was hiking the trail, it was mid-October, and we're still looking at temperatures some days of like 30 to 35 degrees, and that gets hotter in the summer months. So definitely. The team's advice, and also I would probably agree with that, is to try and avoid the hottest summer months if possible.
Very cool. Now, I think too, if I'm not mistaken, Portugal is one of the more affordable European countries.
Yeah, one of the more affordable European countries. Yes, it is. Portugal is definitely more affordable to travel in than a lot of other European countries, especially in Western Europe. So in terms of costs, it's actually a great one, I think. You can get great food, great wine, not at relatively inexpensive prices. And so it is a really good value country to travel in.
And how hard is it to get to the starting points to start the trail and to use any kind of mass transit? Is it bus, train, or how do you get about once you get into the country?
So you can do it in a number of ways. I actually drove and then kind of just got the train back to the beginning, a combination of train and buses back to the start point. But again, I think that you can arrange transfers. So there are definitely kind of transportation partners. So you can fly into Lisbon, you can fly into Faro in the Algarve, and then you can kind of either take a bus or a train to some of the nearest stops and then arrange a kind of private transfer to get you going. There's so many ways that you can do it, but there's a lot of information on the website to help you kind of plan how you get to and from and in between different destinations.
And are you basically by yourself out there, or are you seeing other hikers or villagers? Or tell us a little bit about your day-to-day interactions with people.
So there are other people hiking the trail. It depends on which trail you're doing. So the Fisherman's Way, which is the coastal trail, has become increasingly popular in the past few years. I think in total, it's now between all of the trails, it's now about 20,000 people a year hiking the trails. But the large majority of those people are hiking the Fisherman's Trail. So on a day-to-day basis on the Fisherman's Trail, you are going to see other hikers, not all the time, and you're certainly not kind of tail backing, kind of hiker to hiker. But you will see other people, and you will definitely come across, it's called the Fisherman's Way because it's the way that the old Portuguese fishermen used to go to the best fishing spots on the coast. So there are a lot of small fishing villages, which are really cool, and the incredibly friendly and hospitable locals. So you can definitely expect to come across a lot of locals. And there are also kind of things, if you do some research ahead, there are also cultural programs that the Rota Vincentina team put together. And so you can kind of learn about azulejos, the Portuguese tiles, or you can learn about the specific culture of a particular area. On the historical way, it does move from town to town largely. So it starts in Santiago de Cacém, which is, I think, if I'm right, I think it's the beginning of the Portuguese Camino, and it kind of goes from town to town. So in between the towns, you're really not going to come across that many people. And I would say, because there are very few people hiking this trail, you're not going to come across that many hikers either. But you generally start and finish either in a town or a village. So again, great opportunities to interact with the locals, see, kind of the kinds of towns that aren't necessarily in the guidebooks or listed as places that you have to see in Portugal that are so inherently Portuguese and a part of the Alentejo region.
When they call it the Way, is that a pilgrimage similar to the El Camino de Santiago, which is like a pilgrimage route, or is it just trades routes that these are just traditional paths that the local people would use?
So actually, the historical way is the Portuguese Camino de Santiago. It's the beginning. It forms part of the Portuguese kind of pilgrims route to Santiago. So I think they call it the historical way because it is a traditional pilgrimage route for the Portuguese to go. So really, the Fisherman's Trail is a lot busier. That's not to say it's very busy. Whereas if you're hiking the historical way or the circular routes, they are a lot quieter, and a lot of the time, a lot of the days, the only people that I was seeing while I was hiking that trail were local.
Okay, cool. Yes, we did cover the El Camino, so I'll make sure to put in some information too on the website about the fact that this is the Portuguese way. Perfect. Cool. And can you tell us a little bit about the landscape, and particularly on the cliffs? Are these like wide paths or scary paths, or talk a little bit about what kind of things we'll see?
It varies very much. So what you will see varies a lot on a day-to-day basis. So some days you are walking along they're not scary paths. They're quite narrow paths, and the cliff drops are quite steep. But at no point would I say that it feels perilous or particularly dangerous. You just kind of need to be paying attention to where you're walking, but you're not really close to the cliff's edge, or at least the path won't take you very close to the cliff's edge. That said, some of the cliffs are really high. You're looking, there are large cliffs for part of the landscape along the Fisherman's Way, and I think that turns into limestone cliffs in other parts of the way. Then there are other things as well, there are large bits where there are huge coastal sand dunes, which the path kind of interweaves between. And so you have this, you're kind of weaving in and out of sea views, and then there are these huge sand dunes with kind of coastal grasses that you're winding your way between. And that actually, I think, was one of the hardest days hike, because hiking through sand feels like 3 times as much work as hiking on a normal path. But it was a really interesting contrast to the other days' hikes, because it was something that I just hadn't expected at all. Inland varies a lot again. There are a lot of cork plantations. So you've got huge swathes of cork trees. You can see the last time that they've kind of been harvested for their cork, because they've all got numbers written on them to show the landowners, kind of when they're next due to be harvested for their cork. You go through small towns, you go through kind of open grassland, and you go through some small other wooded forest areas. So it's not just cork, although I think that area, the large majority of the forests are cork, because that's traditionally what's been grown in the region. But you do get a lot of variety on both of the trails.
And for a lot of people, they may not understand how you harvest cork, which is something Portugal is known for. Can you talk a little bit about that? And so tell people, kind of give an idea. And if you know the season that they harvest, that would be cool too.
So I would say I'm no expert on this, but my understanding is, that you use the cork's bark that you use to kind of create cork. So over a period of time, and I think it's every 7 years roughly, you will kind of strip the tree of a large proportion of its bark. And that is how you're harvesting the cork. But you can't do that on a yearly basis. It takes, kind of another X period of years. I think it's 7. I could be completely wrong with that. It takes another 7 years for that cork tree to regrow the amount of bark that would mean it's appropriate and it's ready to be harvested again. So you basically would just strip the tree of its bark to use as cork, and as you said, that's something that Portugal is very famous for, and then you leave the tree to regenerate before you do it again a period of time.
Yeah, I imagine that would be very stressful for the tree. It's going to take it some time to recover and be ready to produce again. From my research, I see that a lot of the landscape are even though, I think of Portugal as, obviously it is Europe, but it's more Mediterranean in the landscape. Is that correct? You see like rosemaries and some of the southern vegetation. Can you talk a little bit about the kinds of plants or things, if you know anything about that you might see?
It's in stark contrast to England, where I'm from, where obviously it rains all the time, so we have like lots of green grassy farmland and landscapes. This is a very dry and arid landscape a lot of the time. So kind of the cliffs are very bare and stark, and even inland, when you're walking, you're kind of walking along dusty paths punctuated with, I would say, kind of almost Mediterranean scrubland vegetation. It's all vegetation that clearly has to get by without a huge amount of rain all the time. We saw a lot of like dill growing, rosemary, a lot of thyme, which makes sense because it's a lot of the things that you see in Portuguese cooking. And then there are also some vineyards, kind of the Alentejo is becoming increasingly well known, although it has always produced a large amount of wine for Portugal, and that wine is starting to get a better reputation or increasing its reputation internationally. So there are also vineyards too, but the natural landscape tends to be quite dry, quite arid, with Mediterranean vegetation.
And since it's on the coast, I live on the coast of North Carolina, and the wind almost carves the vegetation with the wind, so it's kind of hunched over. Like, is it like that as well? Very dramatic.
Yeah, it is very dramatic. I guess the parts of the walk that I completed, there weren't that many trees nearby, but when you did get trees near to the coast, as you said, you get that kind of bent tree effect. There is a huge expanse of Atlantic Ocean where the winds can build up to fierce speeds, and kind of the landscape, the coastal landscape definitely reflects that.
How well is it blazed or marked, and is it well signed?
Yes, incredibly well marked. I think it's actually one of the best trails that I've had the luck to follow ever. It's kind of, they give you, so you can pick up a trail guide before you set off, and it tells you the different colours for the trail markers, and also kind of a lot of the time, if there are two potential paths, not only will they give you a marker to show you the right one, but they give you a marker on the incorrect path to show you not to go that way. So it's really easy to follow. The coastal path generally tends to be easy to follow anyway because you're following the coast, but the inland kind of historical way also thought that it was incredibly well placed.
If you don't speak Portuguese, is that an issue if all you speak is English?
You're not going to find it. There are a lot of places where you're not going to find people who speak English. However, I don't speak Portuguese, but I didn't find it to be a problem. There's always a way to communicate. I do speak some Spanish, which obviously isn't the same language, but it helped a little bit in some of the trickier situations. But I know other people who don't speak a word of Spanish, who don't speak a word of Portuguese, who have hiked the trail without any problems. I think, kind of, it obviously helps to, if you have a little phrase book, just in case you get stuck, but I don't think you're going to run into huge numbers of problems.
I always find a smile and pantomime always works pretty well too.
Exactly.
It's part of the fun, I think.
Exactly.
Is this something is suitable for solo, or should you go with somebody? Did you go solo, or did you travel? Or tell us a little bit about that and how people might consider doing the trip themselves.
So I did the hike with a friend, but I would have felt completely comfortable doing that hike solo. Both the historical way and the fisherman's way, I'd have felt completely fine doing both of those hikes solo. Kind of in terms of distance, the longest distance that you're looking at each day is 25 kilometers, and they're well marked trails. The people are very friendly, the places to stay, you can arrange that all in advance. I think that this is one where you can completely tackle it solo without any kind of qualms or worries. That said, I did do it with a friend, and kind of as with any hike, sometimes it's really nice to have the companionship on the longer days, but equally doesn't mean that you don't take as much time to appreciate your surroundings at times, possibly. So I would say, I would suggest that you either do it solo or in a group of, kind of a twos maximum. You could do it as a family. Some of the Fisherman's Trails days are more physically demanding, so I guess you just need to assess whether that's appropriate for your kids' fitness levels. But as for doing it solo, not a problem at all.
On a scale of 1 to 5, how difficult would you rank it?
So I would rank the Fisherman's Trail as a 3 and the historical way as a 2. So, overall, really not tough. There were some days that I thought the most difficult day on the Fisherman's Trail, as I said before, was actually the day where it was flat but really sandy. And so that was just a lot, it was a long day of walking through rough sand. And that to me was one of the most strenuous days, which surprised me because there were other days where you were ascending and descending a lot more. But the day where I was kind of plowing through sand really took its toll.
Yeah. Again, I live on the coast, and if you don't get the tides right and you have to walk back at high tide, it is very, very difficult.
Yeah.
Because you have to really lift your feet up.
Yeah, exactly.
Instead of just shuffling, you're lifting your feet. So, and if you're wearing boots. Now, speaking of that, are you exposed the whole time, or are you ever under treetop? Or talk a little bit about that.
So you are pretty exposed a lot of the time, particularly on the Fisherman's Trail. The historical way, you walk through kind of cork groves and you walk through other like olive groves as well. So you're less exposed, but definitely on the Fisherman's Way, I would prepare yourself to, with plenty of sun cream. If it looks like it's going to rain, make sure that you've got something windproof or waterproof, because there's not a huge amount of shelter or kind of protection from the elements. That said, it's Portugal, so the weather, and southwestern Portugal, the weather tends to be pretty good. If anything, you're going to be kind of more worried about the fact that you're going to get sunburnt than kind of heavily rained upon, although it can happen. But the winds can be pretty fierce, so I would prepare for that.
And I read too that this is a good birding area. Did you see much wildlife?
Yeah, so it is a really good birding area, and actually one of the places that I stayed, which is a slight detour from the historical way, is a place called Quinta do Barranca da Estrada, and that's actually one of the best birding destinations in Europe. And actually the owner, Frank, has a reputation as one of the best places people to go bird watching with worldwide. So that particular area, I think, where it's based is incredible for bird life. We saw a ton, even just while we were kind of hiking around the reservoir. The B&B is set next to a huge reservoir. We saw a huge amount of bird life. But generally, the region as a whole, really good for kind of bird watching. Good to keep an eye out. I'm not an expert, so I wouldn't have been able to say which kind of birds we were seeing, but we saw a lot of them, and they were very different.
Cool. If you wouldn't mind sending us that information on that, I'll put it in the show notes and also on the website if people want to add a little detour and go do that while they're doing the hike.
Yeah, definitely. I will send that because it was a really unique experience. And the guy who runs it, Frank, he's a real character and also just has this huge reputation as one of the kind of running one of the best places for bird watching in Europe. So if they're interested, it's definitely something that I would recommend that they do.
Yeah, definitely. I'm definitely interested in going there myself. And then if somebody wanted to take a rest day, what villages or towns would you recommend they just take a day to let their body rest and explore a little bit, or maybe do some laundry, or what would be some good stopping places?
So I would say there are quite a few along the way. Santiago de Cacém, which is actually where the historical way ends, is a really nice town, very important as a kind of historical Portuguese fortress. So it's got an old Moorish castle there, quite a nice old church, and really beautiful kind of cobbled streets that you can just spend all day wandering around from cafe to cafe. So that's a nice place to spend some time. Also, I think one of my other favorites was the town of Villanova del Milfontes, or I'm sure that a Portuguese person will be very upset about my pronunciation there. But that's a lovely town on the coast. It's a stop on the Fisherman's Way, and it's quite big, not inaccessibly so, but it's quite a large town. It's one of the larger ones that I came across as part of the trail. Really cool independent cafes and restaurants and traditional Portuguese bars. Great place to, kind of you can do horse riding, really nice boutique hotels if you fancy like splashing out and treating yourself. So I would definitely say those two are the two that I would really recommend. But there are also a lot of smaller villages that are pretty cool that you can kind of spend some time in as well. On one of the circular routes, there's a really nice ecoturismo, which is called Figueirina Ecoturismo. And that's a cool place because owners have basically created this eco retreat in the middle of absolutely nowhere, and it's got a natural swimming pool which they've with frogs and beautiful kind of plant life within the swimming pool, and it's got these huge cool tents that you can stay in and stuff. And so I'd also say, and the owner Paula creates these amazing meals made out of ingredients that they largely grow themselves. So that's another cool place if you just really want to get off grid for a day and totally kick back and kind of get off grid. I would totally recommend that place too.
Is there any kind of luggage transfer service available on these trails? Like I just got back from the Cotswold Way and I had a company just move my luggage.
Good question, actually. And I think the answer is I am not sure. Now, I know that the Rota Vincentina do a lot of bespoke programs with people. So I'm pretty sure that if you got in contact with them to speak to them ahead and kind of book it in advance, that's something that would be possible. I didn't take advantage of it, so I wouldn't know exactly how that works. But I do know that they tend to be very good at kind of trying to make this as accessible as possible. So I would presume that they do.
Okay, I'll do some research on that. And again, I'll put that in the show notes and on the website. And is there anything that you wish you had known before you'd gone there, that any advice you'd like to give people as they plan their own trip?
So the advice that I would give is really I would get a hold of the guide. There is a really in-depth guidebook that the Rota Vincentina have put together on the trail. It gives you a day-to-day breakdown of each day on the Fisherman's Trail and each day on the historical way, and it's really incredibly useful, not only because it's going to help you plan your hike, but because actually while you're hiking it just gives you information about what you're seeing along the way. And I think that one of the reasons that they started the trails was to kind of showcase the Alentejo region, because it's not as on the beaten track as some other parts of Portugal or Europe. And actually, kind of just knowing a little bit about what you're seeing and the places that you're going to, I think makes it an even better experience than if you're just kind of looking at the landscapes and thinking, oh, that looks pretty cool. So that would be one of my pieces of advice. The other one would be to, if you can, take some time to do some of the circular routes that they have along the way. So the two kind of main routes are linear, but there are a number of circular routes. I think there's currently 8, and they're actually increasing those, which go from points along the main trails. And they are really cool because they're just like, they get you completely off the beaten track, and very, very rarely are people doing these. And, they have different themes. So some of them are more focused on culture. Some of them are just taking you to beautiful places. But I'd say if you can incorporate those into your hike, I would highly recommend it. We did a couple of them and I really enjoyed them.
Is this something that you have to plan your accommodations in advance, or can you just go and then see where your feet say, okay, it's time to get to the next village and stop?
You would definitely, I would definitely plan your accommodation in advance, because some of the places that you go to are quite small, so there's not a huge amount of accommodation available. If you were, I don't know the laws on camping, free wild camping in Portugal. So if you were camping, it would obviously give you a lot more flexibility. But if you are looking to stay in accommodation, I'd say it's worth doing it in advance. But it's actually very easy to plan if you have the guide, because it kind of gives you a day-by-day breakdown of where you would expect to start and stop. You can change that, and obviously you can, if you're really tired, you can stop a lot earlier. But they do tend to have created the trail, each day of the trail, so that you start and stop somewhere where there is accommodation. And if you change the length of your days, then you're going to probably end up in a place where there isn't any accommodation at all.
And let's talk about food.
It's wonderful. It's really good. I think Portuguese food is gaining an increasing reputation in Europe and worldwide. It's simplicity, but also it's brilliant. I did not have a bad meal while I was doing that hike at all. You kind of, along the Fisherman's Way, obviously there's a ton of seafood. And even on the historical way, it's not that far inland. So there's a lot of great seafood, really, really good quality. There's a lot of, kind of a long time focus on self-sustainability. So, kind of a lot of locally grown produce, simple ingredients, fresh herbs that come from around that region. The food is just utterly brilliant, really tasty. In fact, I'm very hungry thinking about it.
Wonderful. Yes, food's always very important, particularly if you've been working hard all day. You're looking forward to at least one special meal.
Exactly.
When you talk about this trip to your friends or people that are inquisitive, what's your go-to story? What's the memory that pops right in your mind? Say, oh, that's this trip.
Oh, interesting. Give me a moment. I think it was actually, one day when we were walking along the historical way, and I think we went for probably about 3 or 4 hours without seeing another person. And I thought, how rare is that? Kind of you're hiking in Europe along a trail that isn't, it's not incredibly well known, but it's by no means a secret, and you don't see another person for 3 to 4 hours while you're hiking through these beautiful rolling hills of Cork, with olive groves as well. And that to me was really this trail is the fact that it's a chance to take in some of Southwest Portugal's finest landscapes, and sometimes in complete solitude. And I think that really popped out for me, because it's actually so rare when you're hiking in Europe that you get that experience, or at least along a longer trail.
Any other stories that you remember that you would like to share?
So, well, there was one, kind of the locals are full of stories. And so every time you get talking to someone, or at least if you find someone who can translate, it's always really interesting to hear what they say and, kind of about their lives. And so on one of the days when we were in Brejão, or Azena do Mar, we were talking to this Portuguese fisherman, and he was telling us about, kind of how he goes out in the middle of the night to go and fish. And I think it sounded frankly quite terrifying, just setting off in the middle of the night in what was a very small boat into the very rough Atlantic Sea. And then he actually took us to his home to show us how his father-in-law they hand repair the nets. And I just thought, kind of in the course of an hour, I'd learned something completely new. And this person had kind of just, without any prompting, kind of welcomed us and shown us a part of what he did on a day-to-day basis. And I think that is very traditional you'll find that a lot when you're doing the hike, is that, kind of the local people are really happy to see people taking an interest in their regions, and they're very proud of, kind of their culture and their lifestyle. And so you get a really good opportunity to be able to see that along with the incredible landscapes of southwestern Portugal.
Now, you're extremely well traveled, of course. How would this adventure compare to some of the other things that you've done?
Oh, incredibly well. I think it was a surprise to me, the Rota Vincentina, because it just showed that even though I have been to Portugal a number of times, I think it's probably 8, I hadn't actually explored that part of the Alentejo coastline. I hadn't explored that part of the interior of the Alentejo, and I think it really kind of drove home to me that even though you can be well traveled, or you can say that you've been to a country several times, there's still so much to explore. And and the Rota Vincentina, the network of trails, I think is one of the best hikes in Europe, which is why I listed it in that article to say it was one of the best hikes in Europe, because I really do think it offers something completely different, amazing views, incredible landscapes, the Atlantic Ocean on one hand, really rural kind of landscapes on the other, and it's just a wonderful trip.
Juliana, you've got a blog. You've been into travel forever. In fact, I even love your motto of more adventure and less beige. Why don't you tell us a little bit about what you've got going on and how people can reach out to you and follow you and just see what you're up to?
Yeah, so I run the travel blog, The Discoveries Of, which I started about 2.5 years ago after coming back to the travel industry. I first started working in the travel industry as a travel writer, probably closer to about 12 to 13 years ago, and then kind of left, came back. I started the travel blog, and the idea is really to celebrate the excitement and the discovery that you can find personally from travel. We can all you see a lot of pictures of the same places, and you can read a lot of articles, and you can travel to really cool spots. Like, I live in London, a lot of people travel here, but actually there's so much that you can personally discover, and there's so many adventures that you can go on. And really the blog is there to help inspire you to take those trips, and also to give you then practical information about, well, when you're there, how exactly you can get about, where you can eat, kind of what you can do, hikes that you can go on. So it's a combination of inspiration and practical information. So you can find the blog on www.thediscoveriesof.com. I'm also on Instagram at The Discoveries Of, Facebook, which is the same, and Twitter, which is just Discoveries Of. So I'm pretty much hanging out on social media a lot of the time, and always happy to hear from people or readers with questions or kind of suggestions or, just any feedback. Always a pleasure.
Good. Do you have a favorite social channel?
Instagram. I'd say my favorite social channel is Instagram, mainly because you can communicate with people really easily and quickly there. And so I have a lot of communications with people who read the blog, who follow me on Instagram, and I spend a lot of time talking to people there.
Juliana, you have a travel philosophy called discerning travel. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
So really, I think people often ask me, well, I write about some luxury destinations, I write about culture, I write about adventure, and I do call it discerning travel because it's doing the kind of or activity that suits the destination. So sometimes, I was in the Mauritius last month and staying in a really lovely 5-star hotel, which was beautiful. But equally, I spent 2 weeks driving across the Atacama Desert in a camper van because that I thought was the best way to see and experience that destination. So when I say it's discerning travel, it's really traveling in the way that best suits the destination. And I think that, people are quite diverse and eclectic in the way that they travel, depending on where they're traveling to. And so the blog really embraces that and does that too.
Perfect. Any final thoughts for our listeners?
So if you're wondering whether you should go and do the Rota Vincentina, I think the answer is you should. And, if you do have time to do both the historical way and the fisherman's route, I would highly recommend it. If you don't, do one and then, kind of go and do the other a couple of years later.
Perfect. Well, thanks so much for your time, Juliana. That's been great.
Thank you. I've really enjoyed it. Thank you, Kit.
After my conversation with Juliana and looking at the photos that she and other bloggers have put on, which I put many of those on the website, so be sure to check those out, and just doing some research in general, this adventure has moved way up on my list. In fact, I'm going to try to squeeze this in this winter if I get an opportunity as soon as I finish this one big project I'm working on. I like the fact that you can go in the wintertime when a lot of places that I like to hike are not available or they're very expensive. This is affordable. You're off-season getting to Europe, so the airfares are cheap, and it's an economical country to visit on top of that. And I love the fact that it's not heavily traveled. In this day and age, now that airfares have pretty much come down, even though we like to complain, they are still relatively cheap as compared to a decade or 2 decades ago. And so many people have been lifted out of poverty across the world that there's now millions more travelers. So to find a place that is so beautiful and so underexposed to the tourism trade is just remarkable. And I'm really glad to share this adventure with you. There are something like 800,000 podcasts out there right now. So it's really hard to make a dent among the masses and to get seen. If you're enjoying this program, I would sure appreciate a 5-star review. If pause right now, scroll down and give hopefully a 5-star review and let me know what you think of the program. It'll help others find the show. I sure would appreciate it. Thanks. I'll be back in 2 weeks with another exciting adventure. Until then, this is Kit Parks. Adventure on.